Hi, I'm Jamie Hale. Welcome to this part of the Telepresence talk, exploring CRIPtic Arts' involvement in the University of Brighton's Telepresence project. My name is Jamie Hale, and I'm the founder and artistic director at CRIPtic Arts. I'm a white person with dark reddish-brown hair and a ginger beard, and behind my head is a headrest. I'm wearing a black polo shirt. The background to the title slide shows me on my back on the floor in a manual wheelchair, wearing a silver t-shirt. Over it there is text showing the CRIPtic Arts logo and the word Telepresence. So, why did we get involved in the Telepresence project? We were excited about the possibilities. The image on this slide shows me in my wheelchair and D.L. Williams, a white deaf signer with short dark hair, stood behind a counter of sorts, signing in BSL, and we look like we're on the stage together. This is why we got involved, because actually DL was pre-recorded, but this project allowed us to create a space in which it looked like we were live together. That was the kind of thing we were excited about. Our main reasons for involvement were, I suppose, equity and the ability to work with anyone, anywhere, not just in one physical space, including at short notice. Audience access and delivering high quality online work. Flexibility and being able to use pre-recorded and live performers together. Creativity and digital skills, developing and making work in new ways, including improving access. As a disabled-led organisation, we knew how difficult it was to balance the tension of theatre requiring performers to be in a specific place at a specific time, fit and well enough to perform. And these don't match with the realities of disabled existence. I wanted to take this on because I've staged my show Quality of Life is Not a Measurable Outcome at a range of points in my life where whether I'd be well enough to be on stage was questionable. And CRIPtic has worked with performers with similarly unstable health. And we've said, yes, we want to work with you, knowing that they might not be well enough. We felt like improving our skills in high quality remote work would be able to enable performers who might not otherwise be able to work in theatre to do so. We're also conscious that for disabled audiences, the theatre isn't always accessible, and that while we try to do things like an online stream of our work, we try to deliver high-quality British Sign Language interpretation, we try to caption our work, interpreters, translators, that is, and captioners are expensive, and we can't always deliver this work to the quality we want. One of the reasons we were interested in the Telepresence project was this uniting of pre-recorded and live performance. And finally, we just wanted to develop our own skills. We're so interested in new ways of making work, and in especially how those can be combined with access. And one of the things that excited us about this was how captions could be developed within the Telepresence virtual stage. So there were lots of reasons for us to do this project. We came to Telepresence with a lot to learn. I was going to be the lead artist on it, and the photo on this slide shows me in my electric wheelchair wearing a hospital gown, with the wheelchair covered in sheets and resembling a bed, in another scene from the same show, Quality of Life is Not a Measurable Outcome. We used this image to create some of the digital elements of the project, as will be displayed later. Coming into the project, I was aware that I knew very little about things like image layering, video design and streaming software, and in many ways my personal priority was just to learn everything I could about what we would be doing. However, I think the elements that we were most interested in fell into three areas. Firstly, integrating remote, recorded and live performance, which opens the possibilities for people to perform pre-recorded or to perform live in different physical spaces. And I'll explore both of those in more detail later in the presentation. Secondly, we were interested in how the Telepresence work could enable us to make more accessible theatre, creatively integrating things like captions in new ways. And thirdly, we were interested broadly in the creative possibilities of a remote virtual stage and how that could change the show. And we wanted to come away from the residency confident in creating our work using the software and equipment required. The slideshow shows one of the promotional images which we used as design inspiration for this project, with the word brave over my head and me seated in my electric wheelchair, wearing a silver shirt and leather jacket. Over my legs is text with the question, what happens when you're too expensive to keep alive? Staging my show is challenging due to health unpredictability, and we were interested in whether the telepresence work could get us towards a live from anywhere version. And the show also involved a range of elements that suggested various technical possibilities, which we wanted to explore as we learned during the residency for telepresence. The show was originally called Not Dying, but was renamed when I rewrote it a few years ago. It's been staged in quite a few places, from home Manchester to the Lyric Hammersmith and the Barbican Centre. And one of the reasons venues have taken it is because we've been able to say, we've got a high quality recording. So if I'm too ill to perform the show, there will still be a show. With the Telepresence project, I wanted to explore whether I could perform the show live, just from home, if necessary. And then another reason for using my show was all of the technical and performance elements and the things it gave us to explore, moving from hospitals to the wider world, being reached and touched and moved, with captions and British Sign Language, the audience experience of being within a Zoom. There were so many elements that I felt that we could test and grow as we did the project. And throughout the presentation, I've got clips primarily from the show, arranged in a way that makes logical sense for the presentation, though not always the show's narrative. Fundamentally, in terms of a narrative arc, the show begins in a hospital, exploring the unexpected nature of survival, before pivoting to what it means to have survived as a disabled person in a world that judges you as too expensive, isn't adapted to you, and puts constant barriers in your way. We only worked on a small portion of the show for the Telepresence project, so the clips I'm using go from just before the end of Act 1, in which I'm in hospital and not necessarily expected to survive, into the beginning of the second act, with social care package decision-making, planning, conversations with my doctor, but also some of the more political poetry, things that critique the tropes and pressures placed on disabled people to be brave, the ways panels can control our lives, what it's like to have a body that is not welcome places, or a body that is physically cared for by others. Hopefully, the idea of knowing that we're exploring those themes will make the clips make more sense. I'm going to start by taking you through some of the things we explored and learned, often accompanied by video clips. This slide shows me in the manual wheelchair again, upright this time, with wings made of a hospital gown material bursting from my shoulders, and is the explorations and learnings slide. And with another fantastic image of DL and I appearing on the stage together when DL is actually a recorded video, I want to just outline what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to discuss the shape of the project, the creative possibilities of telepresence, creating different digital environments, using pre-recorded material and live performance, text and captions, physical interaction, and remote performers. So it's been an interesting project with 4 key segments. In-person and remote workshops to learn the technology, digital design setup and creation, the editing, the week-long in-person residency, of course, and the editing, finalising and reflecting. And the image on the slide comes from some of the digital design. Me on the virtual stage, back in my electric wheelchair, with the word Grace written over in front of me as we played with some of the creative captions. We worked on this project over a period of perhaps 8 months. During that time, we had a set of in-person and remote workshops designed to build our confidence and knowledge about the technology before we went into the rehearsal space. At that point, a lot of the digital design work was done to create the images and layers that we would then use within the software to create the experience of the virtual stage. The week-long in-person residency was where we filmed and recorded most of the material you'll see today. And then after that, it was the editing, finalising and reflecting. And we're certainly still reflecting, thinking about how we can bring this into our future work. So a key reason I wanted to do this was the creative possibilities, because a virtual stage has options a physical stage does not. moving faces and distorting people and relationships, visual effects, moving between virtual environments. And the digital setup really enabled us to place me in a variety of scenes and settings. Normally, at the beginning of the stage, I would be seen as in the inset image in the bottom left, showing my electric wheelchair made up to look like a hospital bed, me in it. However, on the virtual stage, as in the main image here, it was possible to put me in any environment. So we had me in a different style of hospital bed, surrounded by people in scrubs. Only in this image, their heads have been replaced with mine. This meant that as I moved my head, mouth and eyes live, they would appear to move, and the rest of the scene was made up of the physical outlines of the bodies of the people in scrubs surrounding me. The image of me speaking, with the bodies and faces of doctors around me, was already more realistic in some ways than the environment we could create on stage. But here we could go beyond that. By putting my face onto other people, we really highlighted some of the disconcerting, disorientating, and depersonalizing elements of illness, I guess. And it was exciting being able to use the possibilities of the creative project to explore that. So the upcoming video comes from close to the end of the first act of my show. I'm lying in a hospital bed surrounded by a team of doctors, listing the futile treatments that have been offered, the treatment offers that have frustrated me. But as I speak, each of the doctors' faces is replaced with mine, creating something unnerving and disconcerting, until all of their faces become mine, and my mouth moves on every face as I speak. The section I'm about to show you comes from the very end of the first act of my show. I'm in my wheelchair on screen. Over me is a white blanket. Behind my head is a pillow. I'm wearing a hospital gown, and I have a catheter bag strapped to my leg. During the clip, wings beat as they appear from the sides of my chair and flap. I am surrounded with smoke. I contain hurricanes, and if they're going to unmake me, then you'd better believe I will welcome these winds. Our bodies weren't made to hold forces like these. Don't you see? I grew into myself the way of a crucible of gold under smouldering charcoal. And as the extraneous burns away, I remain. That section was designed to pretty much exactly mimic what happens in the live show, with haze and wings on the back of my wheelchair. We actually used an image of me with the wings to construct those digital flapping wings, or at least the team in Brighton did. I never quite grasped that element of the technical work. What we also tried to do was capture the sound of beating wings, so that whether you could see the wings, hear them, or both, you still ended up experiencing them. Another of the creative elements that opened up fascinating possibilities for me was the ability to move the show into lots of different spaces, places, and environments. The technology offered such a range of possibilities for doing so, with the on-screen virtual stage creating disconcerting visual effects, loading a zoom on screen as if the audience were in it, breaking the rules in that zoom, disconcerting them, mirroring and multiplying video, transforming the stage. And this slide shows two images from the zoom, one as a desktop computer loads a zoom, and the other as somebody begins to admit somebody else to a zoom. And one of the reasons I did this was because I was creatively interested in making the audience feel almost complicit in the social care decision-making panel, putting them inside it. In the theatre, I could only really project an image. But within this telepresence version of the show, I could really integrate the audience into the experience as they watch their own computer load up a Zoom. And once I'd created this Zoom environment, I could think about how I wanted to break the rules, come in and out of it, whether I on the stage could even see and hear it or not, and whether that kept changing. I've always been passionate about integrating British Sign Language into my work, and this slide shows a projection of me faded out on a screen with D.L. Williams sat in front of the screen signing. It comes from an R&D we did together, working on translating into British Sign Language in a way that kept a similar time and pacing to the spoken English. And I was really keen to work with the recordings from that during this project. Certainly, using pre-recorded BSL footage meant performance timings could be synchronous with the signing. We could work with footage of a performer more easily. It had an as-live feel, but also helped control costs. It looked brilliant on the virtual stage, but of course pre-recorded footage has no flexibility if the live performer forgets a line. Ultimately, however, the thing that decided it for me in terms of wanting to do this was the cost. This meant that I could deliver a high-quality virtual interpretation, a show with simultaneous BSL and English, rather than the BSL lagging behind the spoken English, and it could be done when we were in different physical spaces. And the next 3 videos show the same segment of the show in 3 stages of development. The first has me projected onto a screen as DL practices the signing in front of me. The second, DL is being recorded in front of a green screen, performing the work. And in the third, DL and I appeared to be on stage together, myself further back in my wheelchair, DL further forward behind a lectern. It's the same section of the show, but I'm performing it live, alongside the recorded version of DL.
We would take their historic buildings and build ramps to the entrance and paint them gold and sparkly and dare them. Just dare them to take them away.
We would take their historic buildings and build ramps to the entrance and paint them gold and sparkly and dare them. Just dare them to take them away.
We would take their historic buildings and build ramps to the entrance and paint them gold and sparkly and dare them. Just dare them to take them away. So this slide again has an image from that final video with me on stage and DL on stage next to me, even though we're in different physical spaces. Developing the BSL for this taught us a few things. Translating spoken English into BSL for simultaneous delivery is challenging. Creating a virtual as live stage was very effective, but that it would only work with complete precision from the live performer and a monitor where they could always view the recording, or slipping out of sync would be easy. Ultimately, working with BSL is working with another language, and the process of translation for DL and I required us to work really closely together, rewriting the English and the BSL, looking at when and where specific moments landed and how that would feel to an audience, and trying to capture coherence at 3 points. Signs that looked like the word they related to, such that it would be noticeable for hearing non-signing audiences. Words and signs that had an impact on the show's narrative or would provoke a reaction, landing at the same time, and tracking the emotional journey of the piece simultaneously. This meant at times we were looser on literal meaning. For example, listed buildings in English became shit old buildings in BSL. However, performing this work also relied on my ability to understand DL well enough that as I performed live with the Telepresence software, I could stay in sync with the rhythm of them. And I think without my rudimentary grasp of BSL, that would have been pretty impossible. And we also wanted to think about text and captions. And honestly, we didn't focus on them as much as we wanted to, but we still found that the virtual stage can make creative captions feel and seem more present and interactive, but doesn't allow for flexibility if a line changes. They can also be slow to design, import and change, certainly with the limitations we found in vMix. And in this slide, I'm sat in my wheelchair with the word brave in front of me curved over my head. I'm going to show a video next where the word brave shatters with the sound of breaking glass, and I continue. Brave. What complete and utter fuckers. And this slide shows an image of the moment the word brave shattered. Integrating creative captions is going to require a lot of intensive design work. and having the capacity for 3D interaction with them is really interesting but should be limited for emphasis. I found that the presence of the captions sometimes risked being very textually distracting in some ways, but also that they really added something. In creating a virtual stage, the words could be anywhere, in front of me, behind me, moving round me, or in a specific place. I feel like integrating captions into it is in some ways a lot easier than doing it on a physical stage because of the options open to me, but also harder because there are so many different ways of designing and delivering the slides. And it's definitely something that I want to work on in future, really making the captioning part of it. So that's something I came away with, I think, knowing it needed more development. Now, one of the most exciting elements of telepresence for me was live distant collaboration, for which we worked with Jade Oyanui, a deaf performer from Lasalle College of the Arts in Singapore, and we found that physical touch and coordination felt and looked startlingly real. The process of rehearsing movement and contact, however, was complicated and needed a lot of practice, and that the access barriers we had with communication were heightened by distance. There are 3 people in the photo on this slide, myself in the middle still in my wheelchair, Jade to my left, a Singaporean woman stood wearing black leggings, a blue t-shirt and with long dark hair, and Steve Dixon, an older white man with short white hair in dark trousers and a grey short-sleeved shirt to my right. Steve is gesturing with his arm while Jade and I look at him. And the fantastic thing about this image is that Jade and Steve are in one room in Singapore and I'm in another in London. And yet in this virtual stage, it feels like we're together as a group. However, actually the only space we're in together is the virtual one. And doing this work with Jade felt very exciting and different from anything else I'd ever done, though there were also challenges. Establishing how to build a movement language and rehearse movement when we're in different places was easier said than done. I'm just going to show you a short silent clip in which Steve alternates between looking at the monitors and guiding Jade and I into place with gestures, trying to get everyone positioned correctly for the upcoming movement recording. And just so you know, this clip does not have sound. So the video I've just shown captured a moment of the rehearsal, and the next video shows Jade and I performing together. In this clip, she puts her hand on my shoulder. We look at each other. She walks around my wheelchair, crossing both in front of and beside me. They hold it. They're holding me, my increasingly motionless self. Is that not enough for them? I learned to live like this. I turned grief into motion, and I built myself a life. Thanks to my carers, wiping my ass without scrubbing away my dignity. And this slide just has 2 images on it. One with Jade walking in front of me as we look at each other, and the other with her hand on my shoulder, me looking at her and her at me. And to me, those images really capture the multidimensional nature of the relationship we established. It didn't feel like we were flat faces on a screen. It felt like we were embodied people with the freedom to move in, through and out of the space, to physically connect, to contact each other and to withdraw. One of the things I found most interesting about this was how real it felt. And that sounds strange, I'm aware. Obviously, we weren't in the same place, and yet when she reached out and touched me, and I could see on the monitors that she was touching my shoulder, I could almost have believed that my shoulder was being touched, even though I was the only one on stage. Somehow, being able to see my movements live on the monitor screen as I worked meant that when I could see Jade and I in the environment I was in, it felt natural to believe she was there. Prior to this, I might have thought there was no real need for intimacy coordination with remote work, but having done this and realised how personal it felt, I think I would have felt strange if she'd reached out to touch me without checking first in some way, even though we were on different continents. The fact that the monitors weren't perfectly synchronous meant there was a slight delay, and this made some of the movement rehearsal quite challenging. The ability for Jade and my bodies to connect in physical space relied on us both knowing exactly where to put our limbs at what moment in a three-dimensional empty space. And in the last part of this presentation, I'm going to explore some of the challenges, successes and disability-specific learnings and think about what's next for the show and our telepresence work. This slide is another photo from my show. It shows me in a hoist sling on stage, dangling from a hoist, wearing a silver t-shirt and no trousers, my catheter bag on display. My wheelchair is empty beside me, and projected behind me is the phrase, "I'm gay," in large letters on a screen. So let's begin with the successes. In the background of this slide is another image from the beginning of my show. My face similar to the clip where it appeared on the doctors' faces, but here the doctors have their own faces, and I'm spotlit in the dark. The key successes I found were the proof of concept that telepresence would work for us, that you could perform from different places, that you could integrate live and pre-recorded work, the interactivity of captions, and the various creative ways to enhance the show. And the key successes from the project for me were also that we learned more about the technology, the directions for development, and even that we applied some of the confidence, even if not these exact skills. By the end, we felt like we had a proof of concept and that we were using tools and technology we could carry forward with the show and our other work, that we could deliver a high quality performance from lots of spaces, and that we could work in more accessible ways because we had the knowledge and expertise to bring performers into a virtual space if we couldn't in a physical one. And even last minute in a theatre, this could allow for someone to be projected onto a screen and still be on stage, even if they couldn't be there. The pre-recorded British Sign Language actually also worked a lot better than I'd been worried it would. It wasn't perfect, but it really showed that with the right show in the right way, this can be done. And it shouldn't replace having a deaf signer performing live alongside me, which is still the way I want to deliver this work. But it would allow for me to put in that layer of accessibility in the digital contingency version of the show, if I chose to. I thought the creative worlds that were made were fantastic. Being able to perform live on a virtual stage, but also be in Zoom, shifting environments, building and moving captions, destroying them, interacting with them. Because everything is virtual, it somehow made the space feel more interactive than a physical stage would. And the final success was that application of confidence around digital work to our 2024 show at the Barbican, The Acts. When during show week, one of the performers developed COVID, we had to swap from in-person rehearsals with them, but they still felt well enough to perform and wanted to do so. Eventually, we could record a filmed version of their part, which we projected onto fabric hanging down from the ceiling. It wasn't about the technology from the Telepresence project. The video was pre-recorded, but it was about the fact that we believed we could make it work, which was so powerful. And it allowed us to take forward those learnings to make the show happen in a way that was as accessible as possible and without losing a performer at the last minute. So there were a number of challenges on the project that related kind of more specifically to access. Finding a space that met project demands, setting up a green screen with wheelchair-safe floor coverage, the amount of equipment, the physical barriers in the space, the ways in which the green screen technology didn't recognise the outlines of a disabled person, the technical learning curve, and the difficulties around hearing impairment. This image shows me in the telepresence space in my wheelchair, not the virtual stage, but the actual physical space I was in. My wheelchair is on green flooring. I'm on the left of the image, and on the right there are two monitors. On those monitors, Jade, the Singaporean performer, appears with her hand on my shoulder, even though when you look at me on the left, it's clear that she is not here with me. There are bright lights pointed at me, and everywhere is surrounded by tripods, lines, and wires, which really shows how difficult it was to find a space that would be accessible for a project like this. One of the things I really took away from the difficulties I had communicating with Jade was just that I should have taken more time to explore both of our access needs and make sure we had what we needed in place. However, it was an absolute delight to work with her, and by the end of the rehearsals, I felt we had a really productive, satisfying synchronicity that meant we were working together really excellently. And having talked about those challenges, there were certainly disability-specific learnings to take forward in the future development of this work as well. alongside things to consider when creating other new work. The main learnings we identified were that equipment setup requires more time to make it safe for wheelchair users, and that this time needs to be allocated ahead of rehearsals so we know what we're doing. That accessible work takes more time in general, and that more time needs to be allocated to doing it than we had done. That people may have different access requirements when working with new technologies, and we need time to gather those requirements and meet them. And that when working with neurodivergent people and complex software, tools or equipment, we really need clear, simple, illustrated instructions. The image on this slide shows me in my wheelchair parked in front of and on the green screen. To the right of the image is a monitor, and on that is a tiny bit of footage, but the focus of the image is the scale of the green screen and on what I look like placed on it. I chose it because it gives a sense of how trapped I was in the space once everything was set up around me, but also a sense of the size of the screen we needed. That was the smallest I think we could have gone, while still being able to have me surrounded well enough to capture the footage. And my wheelchair's wheels, as you can see by the creases, kept pulling up the fabric as I drove over it. This, of course, is why many electric wheelchair users don't have rugs at home. But because of this challenge, I had to stay still as much as possible, rather than moving the chair around the space. While every piece of software has a manual, many have very steep learning curves, and I think creating a pack with some simple, clear, illustrated instructions for using tools like vMix to create a virtual stage, that would have been really helpful for us. Because as a team, I think there were times when we kind of struggled to learn all of that. And as I come to the end of my talk, I just want to think a bit about what's next. So the image for this slide is from behind the lights and cameras. Al, our lighting designer, is working on a laptop. Between the laptop and the green screen, where I am, you can see the obstacle course of monitors and lights and wires that left me pinned into the small space at the end. In terms of what we'd do next, with enough time and money, I think we would develop video layers for the whole show, so the lead performer could appear with just head and shoulders, performing from bed, for example. We would integrate live audience elements, like voting and commenting that could appear on the virtual screen. We would create BSL and caption layers for the full show. We would record and develop it in a studio that had green screen painted walls and floors and safe cable management for safety, so I could really explore movement freely. And probably also get a camera-compatible teleprompter and monitor specifically for live captions to try and manage and prevent previous issues arising. Developing those video layers is probably the most important next step, because it's one of the key elements of making sure the show could be performed live from almost anywhere. But the audience interaction elements do also excite me. Could they vote on what characters do? Could their comments appear on stage? Could they be writing in and it coming up on screen? Finding ways for it to work effectively on a virtual stage is something I'd love to explore. And I'd also really like to create the BSL and captioned layers for the full show. I was really pleased and excited by the work that DL and I had done and the potential for integrating captions, because having both of these fully embedded would be fantastic. However, when DL and I worked on a small section, it took about 3 days to translate 3 minutes of the show. We rewrote all the text to work fluently in both languages, but I think we'd be a lot quicker now doing it because we have established that process. Overall, there was a lot to learn, I guess, in this, but there was a lot that we took away, and I'm really happy about what we've achieved. This final slide shows me on the bottom right in silver t-shirt with a blanket over my legs, seated in my electric wheelchair. Behind me is the text, "Quality of life isn't a measurable outcome." Superimposed on top is the CRIPtic logo and the text, "Thank you."